There is a specific kind of exhaustion that sleep does not fix. You rest. You take the weekend off. You go on vacation. And you come back, and nothing has changed. The tiredness is still there, sitting in your chest like something heavy that refuses to move. And the worst part is you cannot explain it. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You are functioning. You are showing up. You are doing the work. But inside, the tank is empty. And you have no idea how you got here. This feeling even has a name now. Burnout. And in the last decade, it has gone from a fringe concept to one of the most searched psychological terms on the internet. The World Health Organization officially recognized it as an occupational phenomenon in 2019. Researchers have been studying it for 50 years. And yet, most of the advice around it is still the same. Rest more. Set boundaries. Practice self-care. Take a break. Which is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because burnout is not simply tiredness. It is something that happens much deeper, and understanding what it actually is changes how you respond to it entirely. So what is burnout actually? Christina Maslach, the psychologist who has studied burnout longer than almost anyone alive, describes it as a three-dimensional syndrome. The first dimension is exhaustion, not just physical tiredness, but a complete depletion of emotional and mental resources. The second is cynicism, a growing distance from your work, your relationships, the things that used to matter. And here is the thing that researchers consistently find about who burns out. It is not lazy people. It is not people who do not care. It is almost always the opposite. Burnout happens to people who cared deeply, who gave everything, who pushed through when the tank was already running low because the mission mattered too much to stop. The nurse who worked double shifts through a crisis. The pastor who answered every call. The parent who held everyone else together. The employee who said yes to everything because they believed in the work. Burnout is, in a very real sense, the shadow side of commitment. Now, 3,000 years before Christina Maslach published her research, there was a man who experienced every single one of these dimensions in a single afternoon. His name was Elijah, and his story is one of the most psychologically honest accounts of burnout in all of ancient literature. To understand what happened to Elijah, you need to understand what came just before it. Because Elijah did not burn out from failure. He burned out immediately after one of the greatest victories of his life. He had just stood alone on Mount Carmel against 450 prophets of Baal. He had called down fire from heaven in front of the entire nation of Israel. The fire had fallen. The people had fallen on their faces. God's name had been vindicated publicly, dramatically, completely. 1 Kings 18. By any measure, this was the moment. Everything Elijah had worked for, everything he had believed, confirmed in fire before thousands of witnesses. And then, within hours, a single message arrived from Queen Jezebel. A threat. One woman. One sentence. By this time tomorrow you will be dead. And Elijah ran. Not retreated strategically. Ran. Fled for his life. Left his servant behind. Went a day's journey into the wilderness and sat down under a solitary broom tree. And said to God, "It is enough. I am no better than my fathers. Let me die." 1 Kings 19 verse 4. The man who had just called fire from heaven was now asking God to end his life under a desert shrub. Now, stop there for a second. Because what just happened to Elijah is something modern psychology can now describe with remarkable precision. The neuroscientist and burnout researcher Dr. Sahar Youssef calls it the crash after the peak. When the human nervous system operates at maximum capacity for an extended period, elevated cortisol, sustained adrenaline, high alertness, it is not sustainable. And when the immediate threat or demand suddenly lifts, the system does not smoothly return to baseline. It collapses. Hard. Fast. Elijah had been running on maximum output for years. Hiding from Ahab. Confronting the king. Standing alone on Carmel. Calling down fire. Executing 450 prophets. His nervous system had been operating in crisis mode for a very long time. And the moment the adrenaline of Carmel faded, the crash arrived with full force. Jezebel's threat was almost beside the point. It was the spark that hit an already depleted system. The tank had been empty for a long time. He just had not stopped long enough to notice. And here is where the story does something that no modern self-help book does. God does not rebuke Elijah. He does not say, "Where is your faith? You just watched fire fall from heaven, and now you are afraid of one woman." He does not send a motivational speech. He does not explain the bigger plan. He sends an angel with food and water. 1 Kings 19 verse 5. Suddenly an angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." That is it. That is the first response of God to a burned-out prophet. Not theology, not correction. Bread, water, sleep. And then, after Elijah sleeps again, a second touch. Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. Notice the sequence. Physical care before spiritual instruction. Rest before assignment. The body before the mission. This is not what most religious environments teach about spiritual crisis. The typical response is, pray more, fast, seek God harder, push through. But God's first response to his exhausted prophet was not more spiritual demand. It was soup and a nap. And this matches what neuroscience tells us about recovery from burnout. The nervous system cannot receive, process, or act on higher-order input, including spiritual input, when it is in a state of physiological depletion. You cannot think your way out of burnout. You cannot pray your way out of burnout while ignoring the body that is carrying the burnout. Recovery has to begin in the physical before it can move to the psychological or spiritual. God knew this 3,000 years before we had the research to explain it. Then Elijah gets up, and he walks 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. We talked about the significance of 40 in another video. But here, the detail that matters is this. A direct route from Beersheba to Horeb could have taken 2 weeks on foot. Elijah took 40 days. The journey was longer than geography required. God was not simply moving Elijah from one location to another. He was giving him time. Time to walk. Time to process. Time to decompress. Time to let the crash run its full course before the next assignment arrived. When Elijah arrives at Horeb, he goes into a cave. And God asks him a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah answers, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts. But the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." That answer is the voice of burnout. I gave everything. Nobody else showed up. I am the last one standing, and it is still not enough. Then God tells him to stand on the mountain. And what follows is one of the most dramatic sequences in the Old Testament. A wind so powerful it tears rocks apart. Then an earthquake. Then fire. 3 overwhelming, spectacular, undeniable displays of divine power. And God was not in any of them. Then, after the fire, a sound. The Hebrew is called demamedaka, a thin silence, a still small voice, almost impossible to translate, the sound of absolute quiet. And God was there. Now, why does this matter for burnout? Because burned-out people are almost always looking for a dramatic sign, a clear confirmation, a loud answer, something unmistakable that tells them they are on the right track, that it was worth it, that the path forward is obvious. They have given everything. They need certainty in return. And what God offered Elijah was silence. Not the silence of absence, the silence of presence, the kind of quiet that only arrives when the noise finally stops. And in that silence, a question, a commission, a practical next step. Go back. Anoint Haziel. Anoint Jehu. Find Elisha. Not a theology lecture. A to-do list. 3 things. Concrete. Actionable. Forward-facing. And then, one more thing. Perhaps the most important thing God said in that entire encounter. Elijah had said, "I alone am left. I am the last one." God said, "I have reserved 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal." 7,000. Elijah thought he was alone. He was never alone. He simply could not see the others from inside the exhaustion. This is one of the most consistent features of burnout. It narrows your vision. It makes the isolation feel total and permanent. It tells you that you are carrying something nobody else understands, that the weight is yours alone, that if you stop, everything stops. And that story, while it feels absolutely real, is almost never true. So what does all of this mean for the person watching this right now who is in that place? The person who is functioning on the outside and empty on the inside. The person who gave everything to something that mattered and found themselves under a broom tree without quite knowing how they got there. Here are 5 things that the story of Elijah and the science of burnout recovery both point to. Step 1. Start with the body, not the spirit. God's first response to Elijah was not a sermon. It was bread. Before you can think your way through burnout, before you can pray your way through it, before you can make good decisions about what comes next, The body needs to stabilize. Sleep is not optional. It is the foundation. Eating is not a luxury. Movement, even slow walking, regulates the nervous system in ways that nothing else does. The 40-day walk to Horeb was not just travel. It was physical regulation. Step 2. Let yourself stop before God asks what you are doing here. Elijah did not come to God with a plan. He came with nothing. He sat under a tree and said, "It is enough." That collapse was not a failure of faith. It was the honest acknowledgement of where he actually was. One of the most damaging things burned out people do is perform wellness. Keep going, keep giving, keep smiling, until the system fails completely. Elijah sat under the tree. That was the right move. The question, "What are you doing here?" only came after the rest. Step 3. Accept provision that feels too simple. Elijah needed a prophet-level miracle. He got bread and water. He needed God to explain the cosmic plan. He got, "Eat. The journey is too great for you." The provision felt insufficient for the scale of the crisis. But it was exactly what the body and nervous system needed. In burnout recovery, the temptation is to look for a dramatic breakthrough, a revelation, a word, a sign. And sometimes what God offers is sleep, eat, walk. Trust that simple provision in a depleted season is not small. It is precisely calibrated. Step 4. Let the journey be longer than you planned. Recovery from burnout is not linear, and it is not quick. The research consistently shows that full recovery from severe burnout takes months, sometimes longer. Elijah did not take the direct 2-week route. He took 40 days. That was not an efficiency. That was the pace the restoration required. If you are in a season of recovery that is taking longer than you expected, that is not failure. That is the 40-day walk. The mountain is still ahead. The voice is still coming. The next assignment exists. But the body and the spirit need the walking time before they can receive it. Step 4. Let the journey be longer than you planned. Recovery from burnout is not linear, and it is not quick. The research consistently shows that full recovery from severe burnout takes months, sometimes longer. Elijah did not take the direct 2-week route. He took 40 days. That was not an efficiency. That was the pace the restoration required. If you are in a season of recovery that is taking longer than you expected, that is not failure. That is the 40-day walk. The mountain is still ahead. The voice is still coming. The next assignment exists. But the body and the spirit need the walking time before they can receive it. Step 4. Let the journey be longer than you planned. Recovery from burnout is not linear, and it is not quick. The research consistently shows that full recovery from severe burnout takes months, sometimes longer. Elijah did not take the direct 2-week route. He took 40 days. That was not an efficiency. That was the pace the restoration required. If you are in a season of recovery that is taking longer than you expected, that is not failure. That is the 40-day walk. The mountain is still ahead. The voice is still coming. The next assignment exists. But the body and the spirit need the walking time before they can receive it. Step 4. Let the journey be longer than you planned. Recovery from burnout is not linear, and it is not quick. The research consistently shows that full recovery from severe burnout takes months, sometimes longer. Elijah did not take the direct 2-week route. He took 40 days. That was not an efficiency. That was the pace the restoration required. If you are in a season of recovery that is taking longer than you expected, that is not failure. That is the 40-day walk. The mountain is still ahead. The voice is still coming. The next assignment exists. But the body and the spirit need the walking time before they can receive it.